Hi everyone, and welcome to Exam Tips. In this video, we're going to explore risk-based audit planning and why it is such an important concept in auditing and exam scenarios. Risk-based planning is all about focusing audit attention on the areas that present the greatest business risk and impact to the organization. Rather than auditing everything equally, auditors must understand where the highest exposure exists and prioritize their resources accordingly. This approach improves audit effectiveness, strengthens assurance, and helps organizations focus on what matters most. Let's walk through the process and the key concept behind risk-based audit planning. Risk-based audit planning is designed to ensure that audit effort is focused where it matters most to the organization. This means auditors should concentrate on high-risk areas, critical business processes, sensitive systems and data, weak controls, and areas that could have a significant business impact if something goes wrong. The key idea is simple. Audit effort should align to organizational risk. Not every system or department carries the same level of exposure, so auditors must prioritize their work based on risk, impact, and business importance. A strong risk-based approach improves audit effectiveness, supports better assurance, and helps organizations focus resources on the areas with the greatest potential of exposure. Risk-based planning matters because audit resources are always limited, and auditors need to focus their effort where it will provide the greatest value. A risk-based approach helps organizations prioritize high-risk areas instead of applying the same level of audit attention everywhere. This improves audit effectiveness because testing is directed toward the systems, processes, and controls that could have the greatest business impact if they fail. It also helps align audit activities with business objectives, ensuring that audits support organizational goals rather than simply performing compliance exercises. Another major benefit is improved assurance. When auditors focus on higher-risk areas, management receives more meaningful insight into the organization's real exposure. And this leads to one of the most important concepts in auditing. Higher risk should result in higher audit priority. That principle sits at the center of effective audit planning and risk-based thinking. In a traditional approach, audit coverage is often spread equally across departments or systems, regardless of the actual business risk involved. The focus is usually operational and compliance-driven, with similar testing depth applied everywhere. A risk-based approach works very differently. Instead of equal coverage, audit effort is prioritized based on business risk, impact, and organizational exposure. The auditor focuses on the areas that could cause the greatest harm to the organization if controls fail. This means testing depth may vary depending on the level of risk. Higher risk areas receive greater audit attention, while lower risk areas may receive less extensive testing. The approach also becomes more strategic because audits are aligned with business objectives, governance priorities, and organizational risk. This is one of the most important shifts in modern auditing, moving from checklist-driven auditing to risk-driven assurance. When auditors perform risk-based planning, they evaluate a number of different risk factors to determine where audit attention should be focused. One of the first considerations is financial impact. Systems linked to revenue, payments, or financial reporting usually carry higher business risk because failures could directly affect the organization financially. Regulatory exposure is another major factor. Privacy systems, compliance processes, and regulated environments often receive higher audit priority because non-compliance can result in penalties, legal exposure, or reputational damage. Auditors also look at operational criticality. Production systems or services that support day-to-day business operations are typically considered high priority because outages could severely disrupt the organization. Weak controls are another key indicator of elevated risk. For example, poor access management or ineffective segregation of duties may increase the likelihood of security or fraud issues. Recent changes also increase risk. New implementations, migrations, or major system updates often require additional audit attention because change introduces uncertainty and potential control gaps. Incident history is equally important. Frequent outages, Recurring security incidents or past audit findings may indicate underlying weaknesses that require further review. Complex environments, such as heavily integrated applications, can increase the risk of processing errors and control failures. And finally, third-party reliance is a growing area of audit focus, especially where organizations depend on cloud providers or external service providers for critical operations. All of these factors help auditors determine where the greatest business risk exists and where audit resources should be prioritized. The process starts with understanding business objectives. Before auditors can assess risk, they first need to understand what the organization is trying to achieve, which systems are critical, and where business success depends on technology and controls. The next step is to identify risks. This includes operational risks, security risks, compliance exposure, process weaknesses, technology failures, and areas where controls may be ineffective. Once risks are identified, the auditor assesses likelihood and impact. This helps determine how likely an event is to occur and what the business consequences would be if it happened. After assessing risk, the auditor determines audit priorities. Higher risk areas receive greater audit attention because they present the greatest potential exposure to the organization. The next step is allocating audit resources. Since audit time and resources are limited, effort must be focused where it provides the greatest value and assurance. And finally, the auditor develops the audit plan. This defines the scope, objectives, testing approach, timelines, and areas that will receive audit coverage. This entire process ensures that auditing remains aligned to organizational risk and business priorities rather than simply applying equal audit coverage everywhere. Risk-based planning is closely connected to the different types of audit risk that auditors evaluate during an engagement. Inherent risk is the level of risk that exists before any controls are applied. Some systems naturally carry greater exposure because of their business importance, financial impact, or external connectivity. Control risk refers to the possibility that controls may fail to prevent or detect problems. Even if controls exist, they may not operate effectively or consistently. Detection risk is the risk that the auditor may fail to identify a significant issue during the audit process. This can result from limited testing, ineffective procedures, or poor sampling techniques. Residual risk is the level of risk that remains after controls have been implemented. No control environment removes all risk completely, so some exposure always remains. These risk concepts are important because they influence audit priorities, testing depth, and overall audit focus. Higher levels of risk generally require greater audit attention and stronger assurance activities. One of the most important things to understand in the exam is the logic behind the best audit answer. In many scenarios, the strongest audit approach is usually the one that focuses on the highest risk areas first. Good audit decisions prioritize business impact, allocate resources according to risk, and support organizational and governance objectives. This is why risk-based thinking appears throughout so many exam questions. A very common mistake candidates make is choosing answers that suggest equal audit coverage across all systems or departments. While that may sound fair or balanced, it is usually not the most effective audit approach. Auditing should be driven by risk, business exposure, and the potential impact of control failure. In simple terms, higher risk should normally receive greater audit attention. Here's a practical example of how risk-based audit planning works in a real organization. Online payment systems would normally be considered high priority because they involve financial transactions, sensitive customer information, and direct business impact if controls fail. A legacy finance application may also receive high audit priority because older systems often carry increased operational risk, control weaknesses, and potential compliance concerns. HR systems may receive a medium audit priority. While they contain sensitive employee information, the overall operational and financial impact may be lower than core financial or payment platforms. A marketing website, on the other hand, may receive lower audit priority if it does not process sensitive data or support critical business operations. This example highlights an important audit principle. Business impact and risk exposure determine audit priority. Not all systems require the same level of audit attention. Higher-risk systems usually receive deeper testing, more detailed evidence collection, and greater audit focus because the potential organizational impact is higher. Here are some important exam tips to remember when answering audit planning questions. When you see questions involving limited audit resources, audit planning, prioritization, or business impact, the correct answer is often linked to risk-based thinking. In many scenarios, the best audit decision is the one that focuses attention on the highest risk areas first. The exam frequently tests whether candidates understand that audit efforts should align to organizational risk and business impact. This means auditors should prioritize areas with greater exposure, critical business importance, weak controls, regulatory impact, or higher likelihood of failure. A common trap is selecting answers that spread audit resources equally across all areas. But effective auditing is based on prioritization, not equal coverage. So when you encounter planning or resource allocation questions, always think about risk, business impact, and where audit attention will provide the greatest assurance value. To close off, here are the key takeaways from risk-based audit planning. First, risk drives audit priority. Auditors should always focus their attention on the areas that present the greatest organizational exposure and business impact. Business impact matters most because the objective of auditing is to provide assurance over the areas that could most affect the organization if controls fail. Another important concept is that governance and risk management are often more important than technology alone. Strong technology does not automatically mean strong control or low risk. High-risk areas also require deeper audit focus. This may include more detailed testing, increased evidence collection, and greater scrutiny of controls and processes. And finally, audit resources should never be spread equally across all systems or departments. Effective auditing is based on prioritization, business alignment, and risk-based thinking. That is one of the most important principles to remember in audit planning and exam scenarios.